As an investor focused on disruptive innovation, one of the things I'm passionate about is using technology to give everyone the same market opportunities. Just a few years ago, the rise of commission-free trading opened the stock market up to millions of new investors. Less than 2 years ago, NFTs, digital collectibles, and other DeFi projects stormed the scene, giving everyone access to new investing opportunities and the new kinds of risks that come with them. But lately, growth stocks and cryptocurrencies have been tightly correlated, and both trending downwards. So the challenge for us as investors is to find a different way to diversify our portfolios, to find an affordable asset class that actually behaves completely differently from the crypto markets and the stock markets while offering similar kinds of returns. Does such an asset class even exist? To answer that question, I sat down for an exclusive interview with Mr. Hai Tran, the co-founder and CMO of Masterworks.io. Masterworks is a tech unicorn that's disrupting one of the oldest and most exclusive asset classes in history by giving everyone access to fine art without breaking the bank. These are not no-name artists drawing animals on digital coins. In 2020, investors saw a 32% net return on Masterworks' sale of Banksy's Mona Lisa. That's 2 times better than the S&P 500 over the same time period. Now could be a really great time to talk about that. So if you watch until the end, you'll have a solid understanding of art as an investment, how fine art is similar to and different from the collectibles and NFT scenes, and how Masterworks.io goes about picking artists and paintings that generate returns for investors over time. My transparency and your trust are important to me. I'm not a financial advisor, and nothing in this interview is financial advice. Masterworks.io is a regular sponsor of the channel, and they've given my audience VIP access to their latest offerings, which you can find using the link in the description below if you're interested. And if you're not interested, I still think you'll find a lot of value in this conversation. I've kept it focused on investing, cut out all of the fluff, and enabled timestamps for your convenience. Your time is valuable, so let's get right into it. Before I heard about Masterworks, I thought that collecting art was really only for multimillionaires. Who is the typical Masterworks customer? Is it an investor, an art enthusiast? Help me understand who the core user base of Masterworks is.
Yeah, so fundamentally, we really think our product is for everyone. We try to kind of design a framework that allows investors of all types, right? So from beginner investors who maybe are just starting out, to sophisticated investors, people with large portfolios who are just looking for a different type of alternative asset. So our product is really kind of geared towards kind of every type of investor stage, and you kind of hinted towards it, right? The art market is essentially controlled by a very small group. Folks that can afford to buy paintings, sometimes valued up to hundreds of millions of dollars. So I would say typically our audience aren't necessarily art people, because no one really knows how to think about investing in art, because this world is so small. I think we have a lot of overlap between, for instance, people that are interested in crypto, to art, right? Because crypto is kind of a newer investment, and art's not necessarily new, but it's kind of a new way to think about investing. And with if you've just been following the markets, I think people are just looking for something that's uncorrelated from equities, right? It's been kind of a wild ride, and whatever the market does, Bitcoin has kind of seemed like it's going to follow. So art's kind of a nice way to hedge against that, we think.
You actually co-founded the platform, right? So I'd love to learn a little bit more about your background and who you are and how you decided to get into investable art.
Yeah. So I founded the company with Scott, who's the founder. He's been collecting art since he was in high school, essentially. He's been a very successful tech entrepreneur. And then, we had a few other people as well on kind of the legal side and the product side. I'm old. I've been kind of around the block a few times. I've actually, I've been kind of in the design industry, building product and doing design since 1993. So if you kind of just think about that for a bit, right? What was happening in 93. It just so happens that, I had a computer at a super young age, because when my parents came to America, their first job was at one of the largest computing companies, one of the first PC companies, right? So I always had a PC. I always grew up around a PC. Was really into design and coding, programming. So I taught myself that when I was 13. Wasn't much to do in rural Michigan. So, just super excited to have this big kind of worldwide web community of folks, right? I got my start kind of in gaming, online gaming, in early 2000s, literally 2000. I worked at Sony. I'd done some advertising work, and then I joined an online gaming startup called Zynga in 2008, and they went public. They made a game called Farmville, which I'm sure annoyed a lot of people. it basically created the microtransactions concept, or the notion of like charging for a cow and charging for a hat. So that's basically the legacy. They were just sold, so great for them. So yeah, I've been like kind of the startup world, product world for a while, and I met Scott, and the original idea for the company was actually much different. It was originally a blockchain project. It was kind of a super exciting time to think about blockchain. This isn't like early 2018. We felt like it would have been a really interesting vehicle for blockchain, and being able to kind of trade shares of art in Ethereum, but for kind of obvious reasons. From a regulatory perspective, when you're thinking about securitizing, blockchain presents a ton of challenges in that regard, right? So we took the hardest path in the world possible, and that was really, going with the SEC, filing these public vehicles. If we were like an NFT project or a blockchain project, I mean, it's kind of do whatever you want, right? It's kind of the Wild West in that regard,
Sure.
But yeah, it's been an incredibly hard path to get here. It took us 2 years to get our first painting qualified. Last year, I think we did 700 filings. So
Wow.
for 2 years to do one filing, and this year I think we'll do 5,000 filings. The
Wow.
business has definitely come a long way and grown a lot. And the funny thing is, like, when we actually filed with the SEC, it was obviously the first painting ever filed, and they all looked at us like, "What are you guys doing?" Right? Like, they'd never seen anything like that before. And it wasn't even like they'd never seen a painting before. They'd never seen a non-cash flow generating asset before, which is kind of interesting to think about, because most people, obviously, if you're going to file something to go public, it generally is something like a building that collects rent, or like a company that generates money. So it's just kind of like a wild idea. And it took us 2 years to prove it. And it's a good thing we didn't give up on it, because, yeah, it was, it took a long time to get to market.
I mean, it sounds like that path was absolutely worth it, though, right? Masterworks recently achieved unicorn status. Is that correct?
Yeah, we raised a $110 million Series A from a group of investors, kind of led by Left Lane Capital, who, like, pretty much, I think, one of the leading firms are now in the consumer internet space. So really great team. People, I think they believe in what we're doing, and it's kind of gone from like a curiosity to something that we feel like we can build a real business around. I think there's definitely a lot of demand for it in kind of today's kind of economic world, right? Kind of your typical stocks and bonds strategy. I think investors today are just looking kind of for more things to just think about. So I think it's the right time. I don't know if this business could have existed 5 years ago. I don't know if the audience would have been there. I think it was hard to kind of think about, maybe, taking some of that market from your traditional brokerages, your E-Trades and Fidelities. And, I think a lot of credit goes to some of these like trail, like pretty pioneering apps, right, that really democratize investing, really made on the forefront of maybe like a younger generation, younger crowd. I mean, let's face it, like when we were like in our early 20s, like we didn't talk about investing. Like we don't really care about that, right? Like I liked the video games and I liked going to concerts. And, today's young people are like checking their Ethereum every 5 minutes. They're sending like, articles about Kathy Wood and like Elon Musk. Like it's all become like one cultural zeitgeist. I don't know if it's memes or stock advice. It all just blurs together for me these days.
For sure. So my background is in engineering, right? When I think about valuing an asset, I usually turn to a spreadsheet or a PowerPoint. I'm looking at revenues, cash flows, things like that. How do we even begin to think about the fair market value for an art piece? Is there such a thing as a fair market value for a piece of art?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, right? Because I feel like there's like this sentiment now where it's like uncool to do your research on investments. I mean, investing has always kind of been hard, right? Because doing the research, like you said, right, like reading like financial prospectuses and investor reports, like it's not exactly cool these days. Like people are almost like, I'd rather just like YOLO into a couple of meme stocks. So we take the totally opposite approach. We built out a fairly robust quant team. And so with every painting that we file, we create an offering circular. And this offering circular is generally 160 pages of kind of the things you're mentioning, right? Like it's basically like our investor perspective. So it's a lot of pages of graphs, charts, financial information about the artist, about the work. And certainly we don't expect every investor to read that. Probably a lot of investors like don't and just ignore it and they just like the piece. When it comes down to actually like who decides if something is valuable or not, or if like a work of art is valuable or not. In the real estate markets, obviously, if you have a house and your neighbor has the same house, and if your neighbor's house sells for, $100,000 more than you bought your house for, then your house is probably more valuable, right? Like it goes up in value. So art's the exact same way. So, you have these artist movements and these artists where, let's just say, let's pick Andy Warhol, for example. He's, famous for obviously these Maryland paintings, but he's painted like kind of 30 or 50 Marylands. Like he called it the factory for a reason. He had assistants who screen printed these paintings, and they would just change the ink color, and they would just produce a series. So some Marylands are turquoise, some are orange, some are blue. And that's very similar if you think about kind of real estate, right? Like you have these comparable works that are, like small shifts, but they're generally painted like by the artist in the same time frame when they really wanted to kind of do a series or say something about their work. It's very analogous to real estate, right? So we actually use the same methodology, which is called the Case-Shiller methodology. So that looks at when paintings or works were bought and sold more than twice at auction. So similar to a house and seeing like price of home value, we just take that exact same format and we put it to our works, we put it to art. And I think that gives us a pretty good sense in terms of, works are appreciating in value, what's fair market value, how much should we offer for a work when we are trying to acquire something, or how much, or should we pass on that work?
That sounds like a lot of great information. Is that all available to us as investors when we choose paintings? Are those things we can see when we decide which paintings to invest in on your platform?
Yeah, so as an issuer, or a Reg A issuer, you can go on to sec.gov. There's a database called EDGAR. And if you type in Masterworks, you can see every single filing for every single painting we've released, as well as quarterly reports, year-end filing, year-end reporting. There's literally thousands of pages of documents out there. So if you're interested in, for instance, investing in a Picasso that we had last year or something, and you want to know more about that Picasso, whether if you're trying to decide if you want to maybe buy it on the secondary market, you could read this prospectus, 160-page document. It'll give you as much information as you'll probably find anywhere about not only that artist, but that particular piece. So that's just kind of one of the differences between kind of us with this kind of regulatory framework, maybe more like a crowd-funded platform where it's like, you kind of have to just trust the issuer and be like, yeah, you guys kind of know what you're doing. Like it'll probably get delivered, right? So yeah, everything we do, we do all the filing up front. Has to be qualified by the SEC, which is it's a tough hurdle. It's a tough standard, probably one of the toughest out there in terms of regulatory approval.
Does that kind of regulatory approval process, do you think that adds to your moat as a platform? Do you think that other people can easily go through that process and securitize a painting of their own? Or
yeah, I mean, it's hard to securitize a painting, right? Like I said, it took us 2 years. It was very expensive from a kind of a legal standpoint, but anyone can do it now. And after we did it, a lot of companies have also securitized paintings. So I don't know if we kind of give people other ideas on what to do, but yeah, I mean, nowadays you see a lot of things being securitized, right? From kind of collectible cards to dinosaur bones to the Constitution, all sorts of things like that. I don't think it's a moat because, I mean, it's a good thing, right? It's a good thing that there's more platforms that are offering an investment that people can feel like there's security and there's accountability and transparency. And I think, the crowdfunded model, I think it's good for a lot of things, but the reality of it is, there have been a lot of wildly successful crowdfunding projects. And once the funds are deployed, what's the incentive for the founders to follow through, right? I think they've kind of raised a bunch of money, and when it gets hard, they're like, well, this is too hard, and I just give up. I'm going back to my day job. And it's like, well, what happened to these millions of dollars of investor funds? And because it's not an investment. So even though this path is extremely difficult, we feel like it's the kind of the right approach. And at the end of the day, it's fiduciary. Like I said, you have to do right by your investors. It doesn't matter how fast you scale, how cool your product is, what you're offering. If your investors aren't protected, then you're not going to have a business.
That's really cool that, you have this, investor first mentality in a world of art, right? So a lot of crypto projects, I think that's one of the core differences that I try to talk about all the time, is, this is an investor first focused platform focused on art. Whereas I would argue that some of the crypto projects and some of the collectible projects out there are maybe more about, getting in as fast as possible, building that sense of scarcity, and not really thinking about the underlying asset and, its significance, to people in the art world or on the investing world for that matter. So I think physical paintings are very, very different in that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely probably a lot less sexy from like a tech perspective and a project perspective, right? Because I mean, some of these works are like we have a work from 1881, so it's hundreds of years old, and
Well,
I think there's this element that I think with all kind of projects, right? Like you need to have the right team, you need to have kind of the right framework, the right business model, and so a lot of these crypto products, like they seem super cool. But, you're betting on the team that these people know how to operate, and this Netflix show will happen, and you're going to make this game. And I've spent 6 years in the gaming business making games. Making games is super hard. Maybe you do make a game, but making a game people want to play is actually really hard too, right? Like people spend a lot of money on that. So yeah, you're betting on the team, and if it's the right team and the right project, then like I'm super excited about a lot of crypto projects, but you definitely you want to be very thorough and selective when it comes to the team you're betting on and the project you're betting on.
one of the attributes of fine art that I think really attracts investors is this idea of exclusivity, right? So we think about the Mona Lisa, and typically throughout history, only one person or one museum has been able to own the Mona Lisa at a time. Is exclusivity somehow tied to art's value, or can 1,000 people own the Mona Lisa without ruining its value somehow?
A lot of these works are essentially priceless, right? Like it's hard to put a value on the Mona Lisa. I know that there is an insurance policy on it, and it's like quite a large amount of like France's actual GDP. Let's compare it to other asset classes, right? Like commercial real estate, for instance. So there are properties in New York that are valued just as much as perhaps the Mona Lisa, right? Buildings that are worth hundreds of millions or even like billions of dollars. You know how many people own these buildings? Like 150,000 people generally. Like there's so many parties involved that go into constructing and owning and operating a building like this. What's interesting about art is that even if we do take something like let's not use the Mona Lisa for example, but we have works from Picasso, Banksy, Warhol, right? If there's 1,000 investors in that, that's still like a large difference between like 150,000 party group into a commercial real estate product or 1,000 people into art. So there's still an element of scarcity somewhat, even though it's being fractionalized. And scarcity is really key because there's going to be new commercial real estate buildings that are constructed, new investment vehicles, but there's never going to be another Da Vinci painting ever painted, right? Or another Picasso painting ever painted. It's just impossible. So over time, in theory, if these artists hold their cultural significance, these works should hopefully keep becoming more scarce, and the demand should keep rising, and therefore the value should keep rising.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, the scarcity argument is a really good one. So when you securitize your paintings, it's in, thousands of shares or tens of thousands of shares. How do you decide how scarce to make those shares?
Yeah, so we actually use the same structure for every single one of our paintings. So we just take the price of what we offer the painting at, right? It could be 20 million, it could be 2 million, it could be 200,000. We just divide that by $20. Everything's priced at $20 per share. So some paintings may have millions of shares, some paintings may have thousands of shares. And I kind of touched on our investors come from a broad spectrum of investing experience. So, definitely some people, will want to allocate more to it. And some people just kind of want to try it out and add it to the portfolio and kind of have a buy and hold strategy and kind of see what happens. Art is not something that, you're going to, really think about like spending a large portion of your investable income on, right? And your investable assets. There's been some published papers, a report by Bank of America in particular. They really look at art as a strategic asset, something like a 5% allocation. And so that's kind of how we look at it as well. It could run the gamut, but I think anywhere from 1 to 5%, I think could add a lot of strategic value to a portfolio.
That's really interesting to hear. Strategic value, is that just to decorrelate you from the rest of the market, or is there more to it than that when it comes to fine art and investing in it?
Yeah, I mean, I tend not to, give financial advice to folks when they think about how much invest in art, but for us to kind of think about an asset to be strategic, right? I mean, it has to be able to kind of weather market volatility and market conditions. And so right now you're seeing perhaps, a fairly large, stock market sell off, and this happened in March of 2020. And you're also seeing like Bitcoin fall a lot, right? So is Bitcoin, although an alternative asset, is it maybe uncorrelated or strategic when you think about kind of its place in a portfolio? And I love I love crypto and I love crypto projects, but it seems like it does heavily follow equities. And then by extension of that, if you go a few levels down, Ethereum seems like it's also correlated to Bitcoin, and then NFT projects are correlated to Ethereum. So art in if you kind of look at some of the published data out there, it has like really very little correlation to the stock market. Citi did a large report on it. They're really the first ones to do it, and had the lowest correlation factor of any of the 10 major asset classes. It's strategic in that regard, but I mean, you're not going to YOLO your paycheck into it and expect 8,000 times returns, right? Like that's just not the kind of asset class that it is, and we don't really think it's interesting. I think from our perspective too, to kind of think about art in that way. Like I said, that 5% allocation, right? That feels strategic to us for the type of asset class it is, right? Which is uncorrelated, strategic.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. Yeah, I've heard anywhere from 5 all the way up to 30% for some, billionaires who consider art like almost a core position in their portfolio, and they're building generational wealth over the long term, right?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's collectors out there that have collections valued in the billions of dollars, and I think at that point it becomes more of like it's a passion thing for them, right? If you ask a lot of folks about like what's the most important thing to you in life, like what's your what do you want your legacy to be? They're like, it's my art collection. Like it's more than just like kind of like I just want to make money and I'm just thinking about my portfolio, and if they do well, then that's another thing, and that's great.
What is the typical turnaround time for a painting? Like if I want to hold it, how long should I be expecting to hold my shares of a painting? And you guys also operate a secondary market.
It's not financial advice,
Sure,
but
yeah.
as a strategic buy and hold type of way to look at things, art is generally held for, I'd say 3 to 10 years, right? And it's 3 to 10 years for, I think, a very particular reason. I think one, I mean, art is kind of a growth asset, right? So you want to leverage the appreciation. There's not a huge amount of liquidity in the art world. Like art isn't being day traded. So some artists that are like still, living or maybe like, mid-career, that may be like a longer hold because you want to see where their careers go and they get more significance and more, exhibitions. So we generally try to look at things from a 3 to 10 year hold cycle. That said, we've sold 2 paintings since we've launched. One was a Banksy. We held on to it for, I want to say 14 months, and we sold it for a 32% net return. And then in 2021, we sold the George Condo, held that for 16 months and sold that for a 31% net return. I think we're pretty good at kind of being selective, and obviously as fiduciary, we have to return value to our investors. I wouldn't expect that paintings going to be held for 12 months or 16 months, and so that's why we have the secondary market. So you just you create an account. Once you've invested in a work, there's a regulatory holding period. It's a 90-day holding period. It's pretty typical of most assets like this. So you wait 90 days and then you go list your shares at whatever price you want. And if you find a buyer, then you could conclude that deal. We don't have any kind of part in the regulatory kind of framework with secondary market. We don't take commissions, kind of unlike a lot of other platforms.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. We just kind of let folks just kind of decide what they want to list things at. So it's not a way for us to really make money. It's just introducing liquidity into, it is a market. Like I said, it's not being day traded. Although we have people day trading on our platform, which is kind of funny. People have, I think people have treated it like a job, some folks.
Huh.
But it's wholly up to the user.
That's really exciting. Yeah, I think one of the things that as an investor I always look for is being able to quantify my investment, whether I'm even trying to value it or just noticing patterns and trends in the markets my investments operate in. So it's great to see that even from the beginning you guys had this super quantitative, detailed oriented approach, at least data-driven approach to picking the best investments and going from there. How do you pick which artists you guys invest in, which paintings you securitize. Can you tell us a little bit about the methodology you go about to find art that investors want to invest in?
I mean, the whole name of the game of art is, obviously the value is very subjective. And who's to say that, like, a piece is valuable versus another piece? You could also just make it a very simple question to answer, right? Like, is the artist important? Are they deceased? Are their works, collected by other institutions or prominent collectors? But for us, like, we take a very data-driven approach. Something we did very early on before we even started the business, and this is probably something that, like, I don't think a lot of people, maybe appreciate, right? But to understand really the art market, it's a very opaque market, right? Like, a lot of the art market is transacted in private deals, private galleries, and there's really no regulatory framework, any type of reporting whatsoever. And the other half is at auction, right? And on the auction side, you have a lot of data because the auction houses, Christie's and Sotheby's in particular, they go back hundreds of years. Like, Sotheby's was actually the oldest listed company on the New York Stock Exchange until they went public in 2018. But they've been around for like literally almost 3 centuries, right? So you have all this data because auctions are always tracked, right? So what we did very, very early on is we actually had to go back and buy physical auction catalogs from some of these auction houses in scale. So we're talking like thousands of catalogs that exist in a warehouse in Jersey, if you will, right? So we had to like trek over there and like haul them back to our office. And we're really the first ones to really kind of like digitize the history of the art market. So we had a research team that went in and pulled every single data point, scanned all of the works of art, and input it into a database that we could index. And that really gave us, for the kind of the first time that anyone's ever seen in the art market, a way to really understand like trends, art market returns at not only the artist level, but from like the artist segment level. So for instance, Andy Warhol is famous for his Marylands, right? But he's also famous for his dollar signs and his, Maos. So we're able to kind of like, look at specific movements in the artist's history. Like, we attend every art auction that happens throughout the world. We have people in the room. We count bids. We gauge, how many people are buying things, how many people are bidding on things, where they're bidding, if it's on the telephone, if it's on the internet. So we have this huge amount of like qualitative data that not only makes us kind of lets us understand if an artist market is gaining momentum, but also on the sell side, is this something that like, will there be liquidity for this, right? Like, was there demand for this work, this artist works painted by this artist in X, time frame? So we have I think, I would say we have the industry leading like quantitative research team, and our data is, it's been published by, Bank of America, Citi.
You brought up NFTs, Ethereum, cryptocurrencies. I'd love to get your take on the phenomenon that's been happening with digital collectibles and NFTs as somebody who's in the physical art, the classical art business. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I personally think it's really interesting. I love the, how much people are thinking about art in today's, day and age. And I don't think it's something that people really could have predicted, right? Like, I think at one point, art's significance and culture and society was maybe a little bit stronger, right? When you go back to kind of the days of, people would visit from all parts of Europe to see the Renaissance, right? Or Andy Warhol was, a huge celebrity in his day. And I don't know if it's like kind of like culture or like attention spans, but, people just start talking less about art. The average person probably doesn't have a portfolio of their 10 favorite artists, right? But NFTs has definitely kind of brought it back into the limelight, which I think is really good. I have high interest in NFTs personally, and there's like, I think, 2 ways to think about NFTs, right? One is just like, I think, a purely speculative vehicle or collectible, even like a lifestyle membership where you get to put it in your Twitter profile, and that is cool, right? You belong to a club. And on the other side of it, like, I think there are a group of people that are really pushing it forward because digital art is an art form, just like any other medium. And I think that's the side that like I'm personally interested in. And I think, where I'm really excited to kind of see it evolve is, who are the artists in this space in the way that we think about artists, like kind of after their time, like who's going to kind of be that trendsetter in the NFT world where they kind of legitimize the art form. They're remembered for their cultural significance as an artist, and less of maybe kind of these like cool collectibles like penguins and monkeys and stuff like that. And that stuff is like kind of cool. But I feel like a lot of that stuff too is it's more about the vehicle than the art form itself. Like a lot of these projects are almost like they are structured like Supreme drops, if you will, right? So there's
Sure.
like this heavy FOMO element of like super rare, sells out in 3 hours. And like, is it about the art at that point? And then they're relying on things like, we'll make a game out of it, or we'll make a Netflix show out of it. And so like, I'm curious to see where that's going to go. But when you maybe project out in the future and you do see these artists that do have cultural significance, and maybe they're like exhibited in institutions or they're collected by kind of like the critics and collectors of our time, I think we're going to look back at NFT projects in the same way we look at kind of art and that's been made historically over in history. It's a genuine art form, and people have great expressions and great statements to make about their perspective on the world. So
I think that's awesome. Yeah, I think that's a really great take. And one thing, one mechanic I've always been interested in with NFTs and collectibles is this idea of a virtual showroom, right? I have one of the 50 Spider-Mans of this special edition. I can show it off in my virtual showroom. I'd love to know what you think about that idea, and if Masterworks is going to get into, hey, we'll provide you with a physical or virtual showroom to share the pieces of the art that you own, either physically, like come down to our showroom, or digitally through virtual showrooms if you own a piece of a Banksy Mona Lisa.
Obviously in kind of today's COVID world, it's kind of hard to think about events. But, one of the things that we had, when we first founded is we worked out of an art gallery. So the top floor was a gallery where people could walk in off the street in Soho, and it's your sign, and they come in and check out the art. And we had an iPad set up where some of them could actually invest. Obviously COVID happened, and so having a physical gallery didn't make much sense. But we're in kind of a fairly large office space now. We are, building out this similar notion of having a place where people can come check out art. I think for a lot of investors, like I was kind of hinting to, like a lot of it's like kind of emotional, and where they do have access to a lot of different things. And if you do have access to a lot of different things, you're just kind of investing in what you like, So some people like this art and it speaks to them and they want to come see it. And it's a way for them to, if they want to fly to New York and see it in person and make a decision on it. It's kind of a weird way to kind of think about investing. I mean, as a tech platform or a startup, like it's still kind of old school, right? I think the folks that are doing commercial real estate, I don't really want to see that parking garage, right? I don't want to see that multifamily. I don't really care about that. It's an easier decision, but people are highly opinionated on art. And modern art can be very divisive. A lot of the works we have on the contemporary side, the abstract minimalist stuff, you hear comments when you're at the museum that my 5-year-old can make this, right? Or like I was painting this back in like grade school, right? So there's just this weird kind of emotional element that comes to investing in art that I don't think you see in too many places. But I think having that presence, like it is important in that regard.
I'm curious. So right now you guys focus on paintings. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Do you plan to branch out into other forms of art? For example, just like sculptures?
Yeah, totally. We kind of threw out when we first started, and we didn't really quite zero in exactly on kind of what we wanted our sustainable business model to be. We definitely consider sculptures. I think from a storage perspective, sculptures are just a little bit harder to think about. Paintings are very easy to store. That's the nice thing, right? So they go to the Freeport, maybe move them like a 20-foot KAWS statue. Like it might be a little bit more complex. I think we're open to all of them, be it, digital paintings, works on canvas, sculptures. I mean, I think at some point, we'd love to be more representative of this kind of art in general, right? International art, a lot of the Eastern market is in kind of these artifacts and ceramics. I think that's interesting for us as well. If we can kind of keep kind of growing the platform and just getting more interest in art in general.
Democratizing fine art isn't something I think people even thought of as early as 20 years ago, right? Bitcoin, I think, kind of happened before this idea of like, I want to buy a Picasso for most people, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, I actually think not even 20 years ago. I think even, like I said, kind of 5 years ago, I think a business like this would have been really hard to get off the ground. I think there wasn't quite the groundswell for looking. I mean, investing is cool. It's kind of very top of mind for a younger group of people who things like the 60-40 portfolio are just kind of boring, right? Like, why do you want to just kind of put your money somewhere and park it and just kind of wait 20, 30 years? So people kind of, they're looking for kind of new, exciting ideas, and crypto is like a perfect vehicle at the right time. There's a lot of overlap, I think, between people that are interested in something like art, interested in something like crypto. I think the important thing is to, like, kind of like we're touching on, like, everything kind of has its right kind of strategic value in the portfolio, and the right type of allocation. I think there's a lot of overlap with crypto, but I think definitely you shouldn't think about investing in art the same way you think about investing in crypto, right? Like I don't know how people
Sure.
think about investing in crypto.
You're right. People are getting a lot smarter on not just thinking about stocks and bonds 60/40, but also, hey, how do I really want this portfolio to represent me as a person, right? There's
Yeah,
ethics considerations. There's all these, like, I really believe in Elon Musk and clean energy. That's a valid reason to hold Tesla. And I think for art, it's kind of the same way. I'm not just going to choose a random painting to decorrelate myself from the market. I'm going to choose a painting that speaks to me, and even if it's not going to be the highest raising painting, from when I buy it to when it gets sold, it's a piece, it's an asset that really speaks to me, that belongs in the portfolio of my life, not just my wallet, so to speak.
yeah, I think that, that's super fascinating to think about, really, because obviously, we here at Masterworks, we hear a lot from our investors. A lot of them are into crypto, a lot of them are into NFTs, and they're both brand new concepts, right? And you kind of touched on them, but, like, when you tell someone that investing art is a thing, it's a totally brand new 2021, 2022 concept where, the notion of it just feels so just new, right? But the reality of it is like, art is literally the second oldest asset class, right? Like, it's been around for thousands of years, essentially, right? Like, right after we lived in caves, we painted in the caves, right? And if you think about that as essentially like the first medium of people having an expression, right? Like, it predates like written word. So it's literally been around for like tens of thousands of years. It's right after real estate when you think about like what are literally the oldest asset classes. But people definitely think of it as like a new, totally unique, totally kind of fundamentally revolutionary idea to think about. It's a fascinating overlap to me, right? Because crypto is literally the newest asset class. Like, there's trillions of dollars in assets now in crypto, and it literally didn't exist like 10 years ago. There's nothing else out there that just created so much market value. So a lot of overlap, I think, on kind of the front end. But then if you kind of think about the history of things, like, they couldn't be further apart.
Yeah, that's a great point. Do you think Masterworks, like, what's next for Masterworks? Will you guys have a crypto offshoot, or do you think you'll ever get back on the blockchain, or?
It's hard to say. Like, I think it's hard to predict. I think crypto markets in general, and where that industry is going. I mean, we're definitely open to it. And, as for Masterworks, like, I think we're good at art in general, right? We're good at securitizing art. We're good at picking art pieces, and hopefully, we could stay relevant in terms of delivering value for our investors. So we're gonna just keep aggressively scaling the platform. This year, we hope to buy over $1 billion of art this year. Just kind of off of that alone, that makes us the largest buyer in the art world, like, maybe kind of by far. It's a hard challenge, right? But we've interjected $1 billion into the art industry that didn't exist before that. It's still kind of a small part of like the overall art industry, but I think, it's an interesting opportunity in a very interesting space.
Sure. Yeah, I think one of the other opportunities, I've actually spent a lot of time perusing Masterworks by now. I'd love it if you guys actually did an offshoot into art education, just educating people on a lot of the basics of even what you covered in this interview. Hey, this is one of the oldest asset classes. Here's who it was for and who it's for now. Here's how it is similar to crypto and how it's different. Why you should be thinking about both in your portfolio, but also history on some of these artists and galleries, digital galleries. Like, I feel like there's all these peripheral great opportunities for Masterworks as the biggest art buyer in the world. Have you guys thought about anything like that?
Yeah, definitely. I think the company has kind of grown faster than, we're probably all anticipating. And so right now it's really just kind of catching up to all that growth, and servicing our investors. But something that we used to definitely think about a lot more early on was kind of the educational and the community aspect of art. Because, yeah, like I said, introducing kind of like all this capital into a market that didn't exist, like, you have to educate folks. People don't really know how to think about investing in art, and people don't know about art in general, right? Like, some people look at things and they're just like, this is just a blob. Like, why is this valuable? Who's the artist? Why is this artist important? So it's definitely something that, like, we definitely want to kind of focus a lot more on. And I think in today's day and age too, like, it's not just about pure returns, right? Because, like, returns are kind of cold if you think about it. It's like just a binary thing. Like it either works out or doesn't work out. And I think the platforms and kind of the projects that are going to become more successful, like, are the ones that really build a sense of community. And you have to have a reason for people to keep coming back. So something that we're definitely thinking about this year. How do we do things like more things like events? We used to have more events kind of pre-COVID. Having the works on display. I don't know if you've ever been like an art opening or art galleries, but like they're pretty common in the art world. So just being able to kind of go and see the art, and then just sponsoring more art world events. We used to sponsor some of the bigger shows in New York. So we'd like to get back to that as well.
That's all awesome. I think you guys are going to grow in all the right directions. I'm excited that you're a sponsor of this channel. And I'm really grateful that you took the time to talk to us, especially the investors in the audience who are really curious about art. I get all sorts of questions about, Masterworks, how I chose this art platform as a sponsor instead of going with like a Robinhood.
Sure.
So, and I think a lot of what you said is exactly why. It's this great way to diversify your portfolio. It's a great way to add a little personality to your investments, to think about things instead of just a pure risk return basis.
I think, working with more folks like yourself and being able to like kind of educate people on the art market, this is kind of, in our ways right now of like helping with kind of that the educational and the knowledge aspect. So it's not exactly kind of like we're responsible for it, but working with kind of folks like yourself and creators like yourself, definitely putting the word out, super helpful, super useful for kind of, the movement in general. So
Whether or not you're interested in different asset classes, I hope you found this conversation about art as an investment and strategic risk management engaging and useful. According to a recent report by Citibank, fine art had the lowest correlation to the stock market of any major asset class. So, while stocks and cryptocurrencies are definitely worthwhile investments, fine art could be a great way to diversify your risks without sacrificing potential performance. That used to be something only the super wealthy could do, but Masterworks has made fine art accessible to everyone. That's why I asked them to sponsor the channel and why I think they have such a long waitlist. So if you're interested in investing in fine art by artists like Picasso and Banksy, and you want to skip their waitlist, Masterworks.io is giving my audience VIP access to their latest offerings right now. You can find a link to that offer in the description below. Either way, stay long, stay strong, and thanks for watching. Until next time, this is ticker symbol U. My name is Alex, reminding you that the best investment you can make is in you.